Thank you. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here at our second community meeting for the Joslin Park Community Meeting. My name is Kathy Baker Eclipse. I'm the Interim Commissioner of the Parks Department and the Director of Design and Construction. I want to thank you for being here this evening. We really appreciate you taking time from your schedule to be here. It's a lovely night, but it is fall is definitely in the air. So I know I was glad to get back into my warm home. So thanks for being with us tonight. I want to welcome any elected officials and staff who might be on the call who'd like to identify themselves and raise your hand if you'd like to say something at this time. Lily, if you want to, I think you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having us. My name is Lily Sweeterman. I'm the Chief of Staff for City Councilor Sharon Durkin, District 8, who represents this area. So just going to take some good notes, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily. Anybody else from anyone else from an elected official's office? You can raise your hand. We do have somebody on the phone. All right, if we can go to the next slide, please. So we did not receive any requests for interpretation for tonight's meeting. But if you know of someone who would like to attend the next meeting, the third meeting, and would like to take advantage of the free interpretation services, please have them reach out to my colleague, Michael McMillan. His email address is corey.mcmillan@boston.gov, and I will try to drop that in the chat. Or Michael, could you drop that in the chat? I'm going to need to pull the chat, open up the chat so I can see. Okay. We'll drop that in the chat in just a moment. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Next slide, please. So I have a few quick items to go over. Please know that this meeting is being recorded. We're going to be posting it to the project website within about a week, and we'll add that link to the chat in case you'd like to view this presentation or share it with anyone else. Okay. So during the presentation, we ask you to keep your video off and your microphone muted. During the discussion period, we encourage you to turn on your video if you feel comfortable doing so. Next slide, please. We encourage everyone to share their questions and comments either verbally or in the chat. Please be respectful of others and mindful of everyone's time. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly, either via email if you'd like to provide comments that way or discuss the project further. And I'll drop my email in the chat as well. So the next slide. Yeah, Zoom tips, perfect. If a question or comment comes to mind during the presentation, please feel free to add it to the chat and we'll address it after the presentation. During the discussion session, you can use the raise hand button on Zoom and we'll unmute you. If anyone else is calling in on a phone, use *9 to raise your hand. Once we call on you, use *6 to unmute, and to mute again. Next slide, please. So we're here tonight to talk about Joslin Park, which is bounded by Longwood Road, Pilgrim Road, Joslin Place, and Deaconess Road. It's in between the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center emergency room and the site of the future cancer hospital project. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with an introduction of the project team, then an overview of the project schedule. The design team will then present a few site plan alternatives for you to review. We really want to hear from you tonight, so we want to make sure that we leave time for a robust discussion. And lastly, we'll go over closing remarks and next steps. Next slide. So once again, I'm Kathy Baker Eclipse, Interim Commissioner and Director of Design and Construction for Boston Parks. Also joining us from the City of Boston is Michael McMillan, Community Outreach Coordinator from Boston Parks. Seth Reisman, the Deputy Director of Design Review. It's a lot of D's in that title. Seth from the Planning Department has joined us to provide some background on the Future Cancer Hospital's development to date. A couple other, and Michael Van Valkenburg Associates is the landscape architecture team that's working on the project. Chris Donahue and John Maxon are the representatives from MVVA. Also, another good community point of contact is Macon Bonner, the Fenway Kenmore liaison from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services. And he's a great resource for community concerns across the whole neighborhood. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Seth to give just a brief outline of what the work done to date has been.
Thank
Seth?
you, Kathy. Appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for having me tonight. For a little background, the new cancer hospital is a joint project of Beth Israel and Dana-Farber. And in 2023 of December, both institutions submitted 10-year institutional master plans, or IMPs, identifying this hospital as the sole proposed project. Throughout 2024, the planning department led a public review process with task force and community meetings, and the Boston Civic Design Commission, or BCDC, conducted design review. City agencies evaluated impacts on traffic, parking, environment, and shadow, shaping the allowable building envelope, mitigation measures, and community benefits, including major improvements to Joslin Park and surrounding streets. The improvements were to be guided by the principles of safety, accessibility, multimodal circulation, and enhancements to open space. The BPDA board approved both master plans in October of 2024. Then in January of 2025, the proponent filed an Article 80B application for 1 Joslin Place, initiating the detailed review of the building and public realm associated with the building. The planning department again led public meetings, and BCDC conducted additional design review. Because the project involves public land, approvals from other departments are also required. Both planning and BCDC endorsed a comprehensive public realm redesign, with BCDC taking the rare step of issuing a formal letter of support. The BPDA board approved the project on June 12, 2025. The planning department continues to work with the proponent on the building and site design, while the Parks Department is here leading the detailed design of Joslin Park through this public process. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. So we're here in August 2025 on this timeline schedule. This is related specifically to the park site construction. So we had the initial meeting last month, mid-July. We're going to be coming back to the community one more time early next month. So this is a really unique opportunity to renovate the park because it's initiated from the development of that future cancer hospital on Joslin Place. There's a lot of interesting things that we're going to be talking about tonight. This is really my favorite meeting of the series, where we talk about what the opportunities are, and you can really compare and contrast different ways of approaching the site. But it is very unusual for us to begin a design process in 2025 and then talk about constructing it and the park being open in about 5 years. And that is uniquely tied to tied to the site development of that future cancer hospital and the unique nature of this park and the infrastructure that's below it. I get a little bit more into that in a minute, but we really want to understand from you, the community, what is important for us to know so that we can make sure that the community is reflected in the park design. So we are going to be comparing and contrasting a few design alternatives tonight, synthesizing all that information and bringing it back into meeting 3 in September. And then you're probably not going to hear from us for a while. The building construction is going to begin. We're going to be developing the bid documents for the project, the construction documents, and the entire cost of the new Joslin Park is going to be paid for by the proponent, by the new future cancer hospital site. So So the timeline for implementation is going to be quite long. The impact to the park is going to be significant, but at the end, there will be a beautiful new park that we can all enjoy for many, many, many years into the future. Next slide, please. So when we are thinking about everything that goes into the park design, there's a lot of pieces that we consider. There's the City of Boston priorities, the Parks and Recreation Department's goals, safety and regulatory guidelines, and also community input. All of these factors come together in the final design. The community input is very important to us because we want the community to know that they are reflected in this space. But it's not the only thing that we're thinking about when we're designing the park. Next slide, please. So just to dive in a little bit more deeply into some of those City of Boston priorities that you're going to see reflected in the site designs, we're trying to create a city that has a safe, walkable access to parks. We also want to put equity at the forefront of our park design. We want to create a park that is climate resilient and provides cooling opportunities as the urban heat island effect really is bearing down on us, maybe not today, but the rest of the summer. And one of the really unique goals here that we can focus on is how to focus on health in this park and how do we create a healthy park that will be here for many years to come. Next slide, please. In the Parks Department, we are trying to create accessible parks that actually go beyond accessibility and create welcoming spaces for all parks, for people of all abilities to access our parks. We want to create parks that have a diverse balance of uses, and we also want to create and to have a meaningful and inclusive community engagement process. Creating an adaptive and resilient landscape. One of those features is one that promotes connections in the community and across the community. Next slide, please. And from here, I will turn it over to John from Michael Van Valkenburg Associates.
Thanks, Kathy. My name is Chris Tani. I'm actually going to steal the reins from John tonight. I think you all heard from John on the first meeting. Part of where John is with me as well tonight. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for having us. And thank you. I see some more faces tonight than we saw in the first one. So happy to have some additional participants. We wanted to start by first recapping some of that initial discussion. That first meeting was focused largely on the site analysis and very high-level opportunities. We've started to process some of the feedback we received from you and that we've heard from the city, and we've heard from lots of constituents through that Article 80B process for designing the future cancer hospital project. And we've really been looking at how this can contribute to an enhanced public realm more broadly. As the landscape architects for that future cancer hospital, we've been itching to get our hands into this site. Obviously plays an enormous role in improving public safety, public life, public health in the Longwood medical area more broadly. And so thinking about how this park can contribute to all those initiatives that Kathy was just speaking to has been a really exciting thing to dive into over the last several weeks with your feedback and that we've been looking at for a while now. So, oops, here we go. Looking at this existing conditions slide, I'll go through these quickly because they are a recap. The park is, of course, bounded by roads on all four sides. Brookline Ave, extremely busy, but Joslin Place and Deaconess, though not as large, equally busy in some ways. Deaconess Road, of course, is the front door of an emergency room. Joslin Place is the front door currently of Joslin Diabetes Center, but will be the front door to the future cancer hospital. And Pilgrim Road acts as another another in-way to those two busy roads and through the community here. To get a sense of scale of the site, we overlaid just very simply an American football field because it's a good point of reference. You can see that it's about as long as a football field, a little over 300 feet long from curb to curb, including those public sidewalks that bound either side, but significantly skinnier. So it's very long, but very narrow as a park, which creates lots of both opportunities for unique design problem solving, but also some constraints in terms of grading, accessibility, and how the place might be used in the future. Um, Speaking of grading, just looking at those existing topographic conditions across that sort of 300-foot span, we're negotiating 10 to 11 feet, depending on what corner of the site we're on. So about 11 feet higher at that top left corner than it is at the bottom right. But also across the short dimension, negotiating 3 to 4 feet, again, depending on where you are on the site. That's a lot of terrain to cover, vertical terrain to cover in a very short distance, and that creates some challenges from an accessibility and inclusion standpoint, but challenges that are very common in cities and very common in park making. And so they actually have become opportunities for unique placemaking and unique design features that we're excited about sharing with you. Um, Also looking at how the existing Rosenberg building, the front door of that emergency room, and the front door of the future cancer hospital, those two elevations again become additional points to triangulate, and how they'll start to shape the landforming within the park to create accessible pathways and networks through and places to gather within. Um, we've looked quite a lot at the existing assets. The things that make Joslin Park a great place to be, a great urban landscape. We're excited to play off of those and continue to ramp those up as we think about the future development of the park. So thinking about that garden frame, seasonal flower displays, ephemeral, flowering in the trees and shrubs and ground cover, the arrival of spring in Boston, which is just so welcome when the air starts to warm up after a long winter. Thinking about the urban canopy, the role that that plays in providing shade, providing carbon sequestration, and just providing a really fantastic place to be. And then thinking about seating, there is, of course, ample seating in the park, lots of these benches. Worth noting that these benches are not currently totally accessible, though, because you do have to cross over a path or an open lawn. They're not tied directly to an ADA path. And so thinking about how we can include lots of seating, but make it more accessible as a place within the city. Um, Looking at opportunities for improvement within the existing design, that long, narrow site is sort of only accentuated and exacerbated that issue of the long, narrow sort of corridor by its singularity. There's one path that travels sort of east to west that negotiates that 10 feet and creates a very singular experience. Looking at how we might, rethink that path to create more complexity, more diversity, more places for gathering, more accessibility. Looking at that lawn that um, rides either side of that path, the lawn being a little bit unsustainable in a couple different ways. One in the sort of sustainability, green building thinking. Lawns are very labor and water intensive as landscape types. But also unsustainable in that it's quite difficult to sustain a lawn in this kind of condition. As you can see, it's very well worn, and that's in part from people crossing over to get to those seats. Also because it's quite a narrow path, and people tend to, especially post COVID, when someone's approaching you on a narrow path, people tend to step off the side into the lawn. So it gets lots of foot traffic, lots of wear and tear, also from some of the programming that happens on site. So thinking about how lawns might or might not be part of the future park. And then addressing the issue of how disconnected the park is currently. As Kathy said, one of the roles of parks in the city is to better connect people within the community. This park is physically, geographically, and like just in all sorts of ways disconnected from the people of the community. You have to sort of leapfrog or what's the game, frogger between cars as you try to cross a handful of relatively dangerous intersections. Also encourages lots of unsafe passages at unmarked crossings right now. So thinking about how we can maybe better connect the park to the public realm as part of this rethinking of the whole public realm for the future cancer hospital project. Um, and then, of course, as I just described, it's challenged by a very busy vehicular frame, that being Joslin Place. Happened to catch the ambulance in that photo, but that's very common, of course, in the LMA. and along Deaconess Road there again at the entrance to the emergency room where there's lots of people coming and going, people at times kind of frantic when they're pulling up to an emergency room. So thinking about the role that traffic plays, though not within the footprint of the park, obviously, it plays an extraordinarily important role in thinking about how we reconsider circulation and pedestrian safety for the park. Um, we went through quite an exhaustive analysis of the park and how it's used from day to day, different times of the day, different weather conditions. This is a sample of that study. It addresses the existing occupancy of people in the park today. Well, not today was, a while ago now, um, but we looked to again sort of morning, lunchtime, evening, and through different times of day, how people use the space and where they're coming and going. We had people out on site for several hours documenting um, all the traffic through. One of the really important things to note about this diagram on the left, that pink arrow that crosses the park, is crossing at two unmarked crosswalks. So people are the most heavily used path is coming from Brookline Ave. There's a bus stop up here. It suggests that they're going in that door, and people definitely were going between the two buildings. But I think lots of that traffic was coming from the bus stop and from the public realm more broadly up Brookline. Um, and people crossing over Joslin Place at an unmarked crossing, again, between lots of parked cars, many of them illegally, but it's sort of what happens there. And then moving through the park and again, crossing at again another unmarked location to get into the front door of the emergency room, crossing Deaconess Road that way. So looking at that existing desire line and thinking, how does this park facilitate that desire line, but help to get people to cross where we want them to, where there's a marked crossing, where they won't be hit by a car or an ambulance for that matter. Um, so thinking about that really important role that this park can play in traffic calming measures. With that in mind, and with some encouragement from the planning department and the parks department, we've been looking a bit at the existing alignment for Joslin Park and some proposed realignment strategies, ways to help negotiate safer crossings to and through the park to go to those both the future cancer hospital and the Rosenberg building, but also looking at how that realignment not just makes it safer to get to, but potentially makes it larger as a public space. It reconnects it to the public realm along Brookline Ave by thinking about a sort of pocket park right there along the street side without we don't have to cross any streets to get into it, and then maintaining this sort of island quality of it that once you're there is kind of beautiful to be in a little bit of an urban oasis, right? You are surrounded by streets, but if we can think about ways that the park can sort of have more interiority to it to play off that sort of island effect. So think about how these two parks can both play together as one, but also have two distinct identities potentially. And thinking about all the layers of that kind of thinking that can help make this a really fantastic place. Um, this is a very quick, sort of silly concept diagram, but it's a way of thinking about how that existing desire line that was shown in pink in our use study, thinking about how we maintain that desire line, but through a public, accessible park space, one that's safe for vehicular traffic, but also more importantly for pedestrian traffic you or that sort of capitalizes on that existing desire line and puts marked crossings where people are going to cross anyway. Um, so thinking about that diagram as we begin to develop more specific site plans um, that we'll talk through in just a moment. These cross sections are just again sort of very high level, showing how the park potentially grows at particular areas based on this strategy. So looking at the sort of south end, or I guess drawing east end of the park, depending on how you're holding the drawing. That existing park, approximately 46 feet wide. At that same section cut in the proposed realignment is about 78 feet wide, and you can get to it without crossing any streets. Um, so it's, I don't know, what is that? 32 feet wider. I tried to do the percentage in my head, that didn't work out. And without crossing any streets, we're excited about that possibility. Then looking more mid-block at that section, again, about 46 feet wide, now showing, as shown, 53 feet wide. So you're getting an additional 7 feet there. And that's in part by negotiating or working with the planning department, with PIC, um, and with the Parks Department to look at all those right of ways and those existing sort of lay-by areas and where people park illegally currently. Despite it being marked, it's very common for people to park illegally. Looking at how we sort of take back those spaces for the public realm to make a larger park footprint and one that's more accessible and more inclusive. Um, this is a summary of that strategy and sort of the spatial uh, change that we get out of it. The existing park footprint, that dashed dark blue line around the middle there, is about 13,700 square feet. The proposed park area marked in that dark solid orange line, approximately 15,000 square feet. Um, the diagram is more or less exact, but we say approximate because we're still working with the city and with, the community and everyone to really establish those limits of the public realm and where those right of ways for public sidewalks land exactly and where all those curbs end up. And we'll meet with the fire department to look at, turning radii, all those kinds of things are still at play. But the end goal or the end result here is an approximate new park area of or an approximate park area increase of 10 to 13%, which again, very excited about from the landscape architect perspective, but also just from a public realm. The idea of getting more park space in a very urban area is a pretty exciting prospect. Um, so, with a little bit more space in mind, we wanted to look at some of those design opportunities. As Kathy said, we're going to discuss sort of 3 design alternatives this evening. We don't presume that, this is a process of selecting A, B, or C, and then we just get more detailed into it. We think we're going to tease out some ideas from this conversation and develop a plan that possibly gels all the positive aspects from different ones that we hear from you all and from, the larger community as, we hear from more people throughout this process. We wanted to start by recapping some of the feedback from last time. Again, sort of just reiterating that idea that the park feels cut off, not just by the roads, but also by that evergreen hedge, that low hedge that's around the border of the park. It's a very rigid, um, you know, plant typology that doesn't allow you to pass through it other than the 4 marked entrances. There's some merit to guiding people where you want them to go, right, from a pedestrian safety standpoint, but also just thinking about how we can make it feel more porous visually, while thinking about pedestrian safety. We want that park to, we heard some support around the idea of a new proposed park alignment, relative to creating a more inclusive public realm. Um, we, of course, heard from you all about the importance of shade and the urban canopy. Couldn't agree more. Um, the idea that the park should be softer compared to the adjacent urban environment. Again, couldn't agree more as a landscape architect. And then the opportunity to build on the existing programming. We heard a lot about the success of WAG Wednesday in the park. Hard to imagine not falling in love with this kind of program. Got some photos the other day of some extremely cute puppies that we're excited to show as part of this presentation. So of course we want to make sure that that program is still able to occur, but maybe the new park might invite additional programs. If we make it a true destination landscape in the city, thinking about how, Tuesday and Thursday would be pretty great days to bring puppies too. We got to come up with new names for those. But all sorts of activities that we can think about within this process. So thinking very high level, about how a park can provide departure from the surrounding urban condition. These are all just examples from our body of work, from MVVA's work. But we are again looking to you all for input, hearing from the Parks Department about their desires, and just, again, beginning to rethink what an urban park is in the year 2025 or 2030 for that matter. So the idea of something that's incredibly robust and natural in the most unexpected places. This is in the middle of Manhattan. Um, this is in Toronto, something that's open and inviting to the public. It creates places for gathering, places for events in the city, a true destination landscape. Here in Cambridge, a project that my colleague John Maxon is very intimately tied to and largely responsible for in Cambridge Crossing. It's a project that's activated by visitors. It's these small nooks and crannies of a public landscape where people are doing yoga early in the mornings before they go to work. Um, the idea of immersive landscape rooms, as I said, right now, there's a very singular pathway lined with lawns. Thinking about how we might articulate rooms within that narrow but potentially very dynamic space by just reshaping the path and planting trees that help to interrupt that singularity of the sort of long, narrow corridor that it is today. Um, again, back at Teardrop Park in New York, places that are sheltered, topographic, and natural. Ways to do this with all sorts of materials. This happens to show natural stone from New York, but ways to think about that and how it might relate to, the materiality of a Boston landscape as well. Places that are sort of held and create, safe, occupiable spaces. Um, Rooms that are framed by seasonal planting. This, of course, showing magnolia in bloom again back in New York City. But this is a very, very urban context. Doesn't feel at all urban when you're sitting in one of these garden rooms in peak bloom season. There's lots of peak bloom seasons within this landscape, by the way. It's a very ephemeral, lots of things flowering at different times of the year. Um, Back at Cambridge Crossing here in the Boston area. Again, those rooms being supportive of new programs, showing a relatively small audience for a movie in the park. Um, Not suggesting necessarily that this is the place for that, but it could be, right? Like thinking about the different opportunities that the a new park with landscape rooms might afford within the LMA. Um, and that all of those rooms, those landscapes that we're talking about, despite it being a small, relatively narrow space, that they're linked by paths that are meandering and they feel like a garden or a meadow. Again, middle of the city, this is in Toronto. This landscape that's extremely robust given this is a larger scale park, but the space that we're in here, not dissimilar from the space that we're going to show through some of these park ideas. Um, so let's get to it. Option one, we've sort of broken these designs into segments, right? We'll sort of compare and contrast as we go through. We've looked at different ways to do this, whether we just do one at a time. Feel like it's easiest to talk through all these issues or through each issue with each plan back to back. I'll just keep going rather than try to describe the process. Option one is a plan that's described around garden rooms, that idea of potentially paved garden rooms that are filled with a mix of fixed and movable seating, and they're connected by a network of accessible pathways. Um, this option is designed to maximize accessibility, occupancy, dispersed programming, and potentially inclusion by being the most accessible option by leveraging paved accessible networks and landscape rooms. Option two looks at reintroducing lawn to the park. We've rethought those garden rooms that you'll see the diagrams are very similar, but uh, the garden rooms is then replaced by a lawn. Those alcoves for informal seating are stones and they're replaced with benches, or they replace the back benches that were in the other room, and meandering paths link the two lawn rooms together. And then option three looks at something that's more of an open central lawn, more of the sort of quintessential park landscape that people often think of. And this is a single larger lawn with circulation immediately adjacent to it. And this, I think, is the most different. Between one and two are quite similar, but there's some nuances to it. Option three is sort of a complete rethinking, but we'll go through each of those quickly or concisely to make sure that there's time for conversation. So looking at the plan for option one, the garden rooms, again, we've labeled those elevations, the 48, 45, or 48.5 on the left, 46.5 in the middle, and then 43.5 and 44. Those are relative elevations. And I just wanted to call attention to that because they are really critical pieces of how we think about these accessible pathways, how we think about people getting into and out of these rooms accessibly, people with mobility aids, people with visual impairments, people with all sorts of physical, cognitive disabilities. We want this to be a place that's inclusive and accessible to all. And so looking at topography is fundamental to making sure that that's true in all of these schemes. So garden rooms, these are landscaped terrace. They're sort of terraces, a landscape of terraces framed by really diverse urban canopy and perennial and shrub layers, like the garden rooms or like the sort of garden quality that the park has today. You see that meandering path move through that's highlighted by a narrow white arrow. And then a crossing in the middle, much like the diagram we showed earlier, to a sort of terrace that's raised above Brookline Ave in this scheme at elevation 44. Um, Option two, again, as I said, the the overall plan is very similar, right? It looks, if I just flip back quickly, those two rooms in the middle are basically at the same elevation. They're more of a sloping landscapes now rather than the terraces that they were before. So they're more sort of visually connective. Um, I like that it introduces a nice softer quality to the park, in terms of adding lawns like the park that's there today. It does pose some accessibility challenges though, as I said. The idea of a wheelchair on a lawn is challenging at times. And so it significantly reduces the amount of seating potentially and the amount of occupiable area for certain populations. Um, and then one of the other nuances to this that I think we'll dial in onto the details of in a minute, but on the sort of peninsula piece of the park, closer to Brookline Ave, we're also looking at studying ways to step back this upper landscape. So again, at like elevation 44, but we've moved the stairs up to it off of Brookline Ave a little bit, so that there's sort of terraces on the upper and lower side. Um, and then option three, an open central lawn, a larger contiguous central lawn starting at elevation 49 near the top, down to elevation 44 near the bottom. So a single sort of plane that sheets down. You could imagine, in that view of movies in the park um, from Cambridge Common that I showed a moment ago, a screen down here, if that was an appropriate program, just a for example. But that idea of a larger gathering place, singular gathering place anyway, as a lawn, but again has those issues of um, accessibility that are significant challenges that I think we want to take very seriously and talk with you all about. So looking at these three concept plans, whoops, side by side by side. No, we can. Oh, geez, we have problems here. So looking at that peninsula thing, as I said, we wanted to study this side sort of as one piece of the study. In option one, we showed a civic stair facing Brookline Ave. And this is where I was saying I don't imagine this is like everybody loves option two. Let's just draw the details of option two. I could imagine any one of these peninsula studies working with one of the other, option A, B, C for the park studies for the other piece of the park. So these are all interchangeable and work together more or less. Um, but just wanted to highlight the differences in a civic stair, one that addresses Brookline Ave, where that terrace is raised above the traffic of Brookline Ave, um, and as an accessible pathway that meanders around it to get up to that elevation to cross the street. Oh, geez, I really need to stop clicking on things. Option two, showing a meandering plaza, where it opens up down at the street elevation, and then a sort of wiggling plaza in here where there's some movable furniture, and the accessible route is now moved out into the sort of public right of way, so that this meandering path is eliminated to make that possible. You can still, of course, get up there. It's sort of more of moving through the public route, the public right of way rather than the park. But it still, I think, feels very much like the park because we framed the public part or the public roads by an urban canopy. So there's a robust plant bed there with trees, perennials, shrubs as well. So it feels as though you're still very much within the park landscape. And then option three is sort of Brookline Plaza, where that whole or the majority of that public accessible way or that accessible plaza area is at the elevation of Brookline. So it's something that pulls people in off of these sidewalks. There's a held space here that could potentially have movable furniture in it. I don't think we're showing it in this plan, but it could. And then it's framed by a sort of rocky scramble landscape and a more normal stair here in the middle. But this rocky scramble relating to other elements within the park. It's relating to pieces of the future cancer hospital landscape. So trying to speak the language of the public realms around it. So that, again, it feels more connected to the larger context. Um, because these options weigh the difference between paved garden rooms and lawns, we wanted to talk a little bit about lawns in small urban parks. We do lots and lots of urban parks. Um, one of my babies here in Boston is Martin's Park, a landscape that if you've ever been there, it's over in the Seaport. You'll notice it has no lawns, and that has a lot to do with its size and its program. Small urban parks and lawns are very challenging to make work together, to just be perfectly honest. Um, Small lawns get a lot of traffic. And because of that, though, at times they look great. Like this one on the left, this is Bella Abzug Park, again in New York City. A very active public realm, much like the LMA in terms of the number of people that move through this space on a daily basis. But this image on the left looks as great as it does because at times after it's taken some wear and tear, as you can see in this photo, they put up a temporary fence and they do some reseeding and some watering to keep people off of it for a while. So we just want to be sort of honest about the level of maintenance that goes into it and what it means for the park's accessibility at times. Not just from a sort of ADA standpoint, but this lawn at this, particular time of the year is closed to everyone, so that lawn has some time to rejuvenate. We don't do that at Joslin Park currently because it would make all of the seats inaccessible to everyone. But it is just worth noting that that's part of the maintenance regime for this park. So we would potentially consider it if we wanted to have these moments of really fantastic green lawn throughout the year. So it's sort of a cycle of restore and then use again, restore and then use again. Um, One of the other factors that makes lawns a little bit challenging in small urban parks, like this one, small urban parks are usually small because they're bounded by tall buildings. On this one, much like other, urban parks like I'm discussing, the current Joslin Park, as we can see, and largely unchanged by the future cancer hospital project. It gets about 4 to 5 hours of sun in that top left corner, more like 2 to 3 hours of sun in the bottom right, and that's just shadow from buildings, not including tree canopy. Um, that's kind of right on the cusp of where a lawn wants to be in terms of the amount of daily sunlight. 2 to 3 hours really isn't quite enough, to be honest, to maintain a really successful lawn. And so, as I was saying, just another factor. It's not impossible with ideal conditions to get a lawn to work, but knowing how much foot traffic it gets and that there's limited light, we're just a little bit leery of it. Doesn't mean it's impossible. I'm not trying to cancel out those two options. Um, it's just something that we're thinking about as we develop these because I know there is something appealing about more soft space in an urban landscape. Um, okay, so looking at those three plans from an accessibility standpoint, these terraces, the accessible terraces labeled in yellow, um, the blue arrows denoting an accessible path of travel. Where they're dashed, they are sort of technically accessible by code. So this dash line here that you're seeing within the public right of way, it's technically accessible because it's the slope of the adjacent road. It's a little greater than 5%, which is what an ADA path needs to be to not have a handrail. But so technically accessible, we think, still challenging. It presents a challenge anyway. Um, and then in orange showing places that involve or paths of travel that involve a stair or a stone scramble. So just acknowledging that those again are challenging for certain populations, but that they are paths of travel through this space. So we like the dynamism that this plan allows for, lots of different ways to navigate through and around, lots of different places to occupy that provide, seasonal diversity and scalar diversity, places that feel like rather than the singularity of the existing park, that there's more nooks and crannies of this place to, go have lunch, sit with a friend, have a phone call. They would, of course, be well lit so that those nooks and crannies are safe at night. We recognize that the LMA is a 24-hour place. But just looking at the sort of dynamism of this plan, I think is exciting relative to the singularity of the current landscape. That same layer of information over option two, where we're looking at those lawn rooms. So that pathway through is, it's navigable, but potentially challenging from an ADA standpoint. It is singular in its expression. There's no vertical, like stair, but it is an inaccessible surface from an ADA standpoint. There's ways to improve upon that, but just acknowledging that it's a potential challenge. Um, and then those garden rooms, those accessible paved garden rooms, still looking at those being paved here in the public realm, adjacent to Brookline Ave, that we think will really feel like a very urban landscape, I think. Um, and then option three, the more open central lawn. Again, the lawn grows, but the majority of that circulation happens adjacent to the lawn. There's also something a little bit different. I'll just go back and forth between two and three quickly. One of the things you can see is that in these plans on options one and two, there's a sidewalk along the sort of drawing north or top of this park that's parallel to Joslin Place. In this option, we've sort of bowed that pathway and eliminated some of the redundancy. Um, it's something that, again, I think we'd have to have some serious conversations with PIC and with the planning department and the parks department to see if that was even feasible. But trying to tease out lots of different design opportunities with these studies. It just gets that we did that to eliminate the redundancy, and in doing so, get more occupiable parkland within a relatively small footprint. So just another sort of design parameter to play with as we develop these options into one single sort of final plan for next meetings and beyond. Um, Looking at sort of program and how these spaces might be used. For concept one, the garden rooms, thinking about how, it allows this shows a mix of true to scale 10 by 10 and 10 by 20 tents. So it could be a sort of, farmer's market or something totally new to the LMA. I know a farmer's market would be very uncommon here, but I don't know, interesting to think about a very new program for this area, or potentially some kind of networking event. There's lots of cross-pollination between, different institutions in the medical community. Maybe that's a more appropriate use within the LMA, but again, thinking about how this could be populated by all sorts of new programs, something that builds on the success of WAG Wednesday and offers new programs. Within those garden rooms. Option two, the lawn rooms and meandering garden paths. Thinking again about how this becomes a sort of restorative landscape, somewhere for people in the community who are, coming to the hospital as a patient or as family or friend of a patient. This gives someone a place to step out of the future cancer hospital or the emergency room on the other side, or any of the other buildings that are in the larger public realm. Somewhere to just go decompress, take a deep breath, meander through a garden that feels very detached from the medical community, at least in its sort of experience, right? It's right there. It's super accessible. But I think, psychologically offers some departure. And that those lawn rooms might be places for events like WAG Wednesday or other garden events, but would take some wear and tear from those as well. Um, and then looking at the larger gathering lawn, again, allows for events like the ones we've been discussing, but also becomes a more sort of open, passive space for people to gather, sit out on the lawn on a blanket to have lunch. Um, you know, Going out here again for some restorative space after visiting, family and friends. Uh, in the Here's some other comparisons that are sort of very metric based. And I think I'm close to wrapping up so we can get to discussion points. It's a lot of information to throw at you all at once. But we wanted to do really sort of precise measurements of what the existing park offers and what each of these options offers in terms of accessibility and seating and planting. Um, so we'll go through each of these one by one. In the existing park seating, there's 18 total benches. It's 145 linear feet of backed benches that are inaccessible because they are, adjacent to a lawn and there's no direct accessible pathway to them other than over the lawn. But 30 linear feet of backed benches that are accessible, and that's out here along the pathways, and up here along the pathway as well. Planting, there's about 6,000 square feet in the light green around the outer perimeter. And when we say planting, we mean, trees, shrubs, perennials, the daffodils that we saw in that first image. Um, and then the lawn that in this diagram shows just under 4,000 square feet of lawn through the middle of the site. Um, Looking at some of those same metrics or all of those same metrics within this plan, the garden rooms, um, 13 total accessible benches, accessible being key, as the other ones were not in the existing landscape. So it's 105 linear feet of backed benches with companion seating. I should have said that prior. We're offering places throughout the park, many places where you can pull up a wheelchair and be co-planar with someone on a park bench. Very important to provide those kinds of opportunities again to be a more inclusive place. Um, so that's showing an increase of about 75 linear feet from the existing park for accessible seating. Um, Stone seating. So um, that's more informal along some of these climbing paths and in these sort of informal amphitheaters that help to negotiate the changing grade. About 95 linear feet in stone seating as drawn. Um, in the plant beds, we are now up to 7,100 square feet again of like layered canopy, tree canopy, and shrub and perennial. That doesn't include all of the new sort of public right of way. I'm showing my hand over it. I hope you can see that. Um, Along the street side. So new tree canopy out there as well. That's not included in this diagram because it's not technically within the park footprint, but I think would feel very much like the park landscape. Um, and accessible gathering space. So really almost none in the existing park in terms of true ADA accessibility. This showing 4,200 square feet of new accessible gathering space within option one in this garden room scheme. Option two, similar, an increase in accessibility in benches. I won't go through every single dimension here. It just gets sort of too nuanced to take it all in. About 200 linear feet of stone seating. Um, Again, this plan's showing about 7,100 square feet of layered planting with tree, shrub, and perennial. 2,300 square feet of lawn, so it's a little bit of a decrease. It's a 1,600 square foot decrease from the existing. And this, because we're just showing paved areas in the sort of peninsula, um, looking at a 1,500 square foot of increase in accessible gathering space. And then in the open central lawn scheme, again, this is showing 6 total benches with companion seating. So uh, that's a 20-foot linear foot increase from the existing. Not quite as many benches in this scheme as in like scheme one, for example. Partly because it changes the way there aren't those garden rooms, right, where there's level terraces, more of a climbing path through the whole scheme. Um, about 315 linear feet of stone seating, so a little bit more of that, more natural, informal opportunities for gathering in the landscape. 7,100 or 7,000 square feet of layered planting, 1,000 square feet increase from the existing. Um, Almost the same amount as lawn. This showing just a 300 square foot decrease from the existing park space and a 1,500 square foot increase from the existing in terms of accessible gathering place, again, out near Brookline Ave within the peninsula. Um, So we've got the 3 concept plans, the garden rooms, the lawn rooms, the open central lawn. I've probably given you way too much information on each of them, but wanted to talk through some of the nuances because they are helpful in sort of developing one single vision with some conversation with you. And I think we'll pass it back to Kathy to help facilitate some of that conversation this evening. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That was definitely a lot of information, and really thank you for it. Um, but I want to open it up to listening and discussion right now, and maybe if we can go back to the previous slide just so we can see all 3 of those all together. Again, if you can use the raise hand function to let us know you'd like to make a comment, and then we can call on you to unmute yourself. If you're on a phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And once we call on you, use *6 to unmute and then to mute again. Um, I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts that you have. Freddie, yes. Thank you. Oh, I should.
Hi. Okay. Did you unmute me?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Well, I put something in the chat, but I don't know if it actually got there.
You did. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Okay. So I just, from experience, both at and working in the medical area and advocating for parks, uh, the maintenance, the long-term maintenance is really important. And the expense, I don't know how you calculate the expense because it's a long-term expectation. But it really needs to be considered because as the way I understand it, the park is going to be built as a capital investment along with the building, the hospital. But the maintenance of it is to be borne by Beth Israel through basically it would be through their operating funds. And I think that has to be a consideration. And in whatever way the balance between the built space and the soft spaces can be tempered in terms of what it's going to be to maintain it. And for instance, lawns are very, very hard to maintain. Well, plant materials are in general, but I would say whatever the amount of really good capital construction up front can be accomplished with the decided on plan is important, because it's a one-shot deal. Maintenance is not a one-shot deal, it's decades. And I do think that we have to respect what maintenance costs mean to a medical institution. And so I guess what I'm meandering and mumbling about is it is a big deal to think about the maintenance. So I really want the long-term maintenance to be considered in the plan that's decided upon. And just, I was thinking back, and I know like the Monk's Garden over in the Gardner Museum, it's got a lot of little meandering paths and not a whole lot of real estate, soft real estate. I mean, but you can get a lot out of the design and pockets of things and paths as was discussed here. So that to me makes a nice feeling in a park that avoids massive plant maintenance that might be required by some of the designs. So however it can be eliminated, the softscape can be eliminated or at least balance with the hardscapes, so that you get a feeling of a soft park, but the costs are a big feature. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Freddie. So what I'm hearing is that you're really, the maintenance considerations are real, and that you would really like to see a park that is long lasting and that the vision is able to withstand the test of time. Does that feel
Yes,
accurate?
yes, and respects the role of the hospital to be obligated to care for the space that someone else is basically making the decisions on.
Okay.
Which is, the Parks Department, the city planning,
Yeah.
and all that. But the understanding is in place. So I just, obligating a medical facility to maintain, just in an outlandish example, something that's very sophisticated horticulturally is not is not what the hospital should be left with as a part of
Okay.
that. Yeah.
So it's not just the lawn, which is what I don't know
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
I thought that. It's also the palette of the planting as well,
Yeah,
making
I
sure
think so.
that
I think
is
so. Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Allison?
Yeah, hi. I think those are very good points Freddie just made. Also thinking about climate change and the need for water with horticulture. I think that's going to be important with what is finally decided on. I wanted to kind of tie in some of the points from the meeting one to the presentation today, and really thank you for all the details. Um, in meeting one, we did talk about the crosswalks, and you mentioned in the beginning of this meeting, Chris, the building entrances and the current desire line from the bus stop. I think it's not just the bus stop, but also, of course, all the retail, the restaurants in the next block that are closer to Longwood. So, a point that I tried to make in meeting one was I felt like the people who most use this park are generally under time constraints and limited lunch hours or in between appointments, whatever. And so sometimes meandering paths are look nice, but actually direct paths might be more useful. But I am focused on the Rosenberg entrance from the ER entrance there and the distance to the crosswalk because you said the current desire line is people going directly from that doorway to the park and then diagonally. So my question would be whether that's not possible to do in an accessible way. I just wondered why you didn't work on that more. I agree with the points you made about lawn being too high maintenance. That doesn't seem like a practical use. And also the idea of eliminating redundant pavement. I think you want to maximize the green space as much as possible. So that's my question is about the current users, desire lines, and crosswalks across these Joslin Place and Deaconess Road. Also, understanding that the bus stop is going to be moved, I think that is possibly a concern, but I think again, most people are going to those restaurants closer to Longwood, and that's why the shortcut direct route is important. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Allison. Chris or John, can you speak a little about some of the urban design moves relating to the crosswalk specifically, and then we think we can dive into some of the pedestrian
Sure.
circulation in general,
Yep.
um, in the whole
Yeah, I can
public
speak to
realm.
that. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Um, it's again, it's one of the things that I think we're still very much working on with the planning department, with traffic. We've been working with our traffic engineers and with the cities to develop a plan that's both, direct and also safe in terms of where those crossings land relative to the mid-block condition, relative to this existing drop-off at the entrance to Rosenberg. One of the biggest concerns from BI's standpoint, and concern just in the people who are like, live and breathe the emergency room and see what people do, how people pull into that space. The idea of introducing a marked crossing, even if it's marked, is still putting people right into a place where people are often pulling up quite quickly because they're in an emergency, right? And so leaving that emergency drop-off area free of pedestrian crossings and making the entrance to the park and that direct, path through off to the end of it after people have gone through that drop-off area um, was, in many ways sort of paramount in aligning these crosswalks with the existing drop-off area. I think we are also sort of renegotiating some of the curbs there to maybe even shorten the drop-off area just a smidge. I forget exactly where we landed on that study. But all of this is just to say that we're doing as much as we can to make that pathway as direct as possible while also moving it out of the the desire to move through an active vehicular drop off. I think Seth, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And just to speak a little bit, Allison, to the coordination that we've been doing with PIC, with BTD, with the proponent. I think part of the challenge today is that there are perimeter sidewalks that run around the entire, park facing the street, and so that encourages people to cross anywhere they want, right? And so I think the challenge here has been to see if BTD and PIC will accept a right-of-way design where the sidewalk isn't immediately adjacent to the roadbed itself. And you see that sort of approach reflected, I think, in option one on both sides of on both Joslin Street as well as Deaconess. Um, they may require a perimeter sidewalk. That's what I believe option two in the south and option three have. But very much agreed that we're trying to find the right balance between getting folks to and from the front door to the park, as well as folks who are coming from both directions on Longwood Ave. And so I think where the team has drawn the sidewalks in working with BTD was an attempt to sort of merge those um, desire lines as best as possible and consolidate them into, one crossing on each side rather than having multiple crossings on each side, which PIC and BTD felt were less safe.
I think the other thing that's contributing to the pedestrians mid-block crossing is the location of the park entrances on Joslin Place and Deaconess Road. Both of those in the current plan, if we can go back to page 14 in the presentation, which I think is pretty far back, but based on the pedestrian counts, pedestrians were exiting the park mid-block because that's where the entrance was, right? So you can see that the pedestrians are following the pathways very logically. It's the pathways that are putting them into unsafe conditions. So I think the site plans have tried to move those park entrances to align with the crosswalks so that there may still be some unsafe crossings, but drastically reduced because the pathways, the park pathways align with the crossings. So people are directed to the crossings. Anything else on the planting palette? I don't know if MVVA could speak to some of the maintenance, your
Yeah.
experience with maintaining sites like this.
Yeah, it's a thank you for that comment as well. Super, super important. It's like the worst thing in the world to see a landscape that you've worked so hard on. Probably not the worst thing in the world, I guess, but so hard on just fall by the wayside if it's not able to be maintained. And so those conversations happen um not just throughout the design process, but right up front. We have one with the entire client team at BI coming up later this week, honestly, to talk about exactly that issue based on the feedback we received tonight. It's one of the most important pieces of park making. Often, it's also central to like college campus design is something we do a lot of as well. I have work going on at Boston University right now. Um, Same exact conversation around a really robust, diverse plant layer is great if it can be maintained. If it can't, it's sort of a disaster in a pretty short amount of time. And so looking at how this can be layered and provide diversity, but also in many ways pretty straightforward and simple as a landscape to maintain. All landscapes require some maintenance. We want to make sure that maintenance is in line with our client team's expectation of what it will take to maintain the place. And from a sort of sustainability standpoint, all those plant beds would be fed likely by a drip irrigation system, which is as efficient as it can possibly be in terms of providing water to the site. It puts it right into the soil. There's no loss to evaporation in the air or to wind, like the way that spray irrigation often, often has. So looking at how we can be extremely efficient with that, extremely efficient with water, and sort of, energy in the park. This is not really the question, but, lighting would also be, tied to dark sky parameters. So we'd be following lead parameters, or not really for park, but providing sustainable parameters in terms of making sure that this was as efficient as it could be from an energy standpoint as well.
And Chris, can you speak a little bit to why irrigation is so important, particularly at this site, given the subsurface conditions?
Sure. Irrigation's important on any landscape, right? In some ways, it's how it's managed, I guess, whether it's going to be by hand. In some parks, we just have hose bibs where people are out there with hoses and spot watering. On this one, we'll have a relatively shallow soil profile, and one that then drains into, um, a relatively shallow soil profile, then with utilities. And there's a tunnel below the site that you can see in the dashed lines in these plans. I didn't even highlight it in any of these diagrams. We just didn't talk about it. But um, providing a drip irrigation system helps to keep the soil just moist enough to keep the plants alive and thriving, without oversaturating the site, without then overburdening and flooding or pushing water out into the city's CSO, et cetera. So just using only the amount of water that's needed. We would likely include moisture sensors to tell the irrigation when to go on and when it doesn't need to, if there's been a recent flood event or a recent storm event. So yeah, just introducing irrigation as a way to maintain and establish that landscape, and only when the water is absolutely needed.
Thanks. Are there any other questions, thoughts about the three schemes? If there's a scheme that is more or a part of the scheme that you are reacting more to than another? I think we're showing a couple of different options in terms of the hardscape versus lawn area, getting some feedback on that, and then the different ways that the peninsula is accommodated through either the civic stairs or the smaller enclosed rooms. I forget what all of those were called, Chris, but that was a great thing to dive into. Allison?
Well, thank you, Kathy. The peninsula, I didn't mention it the first time I spoke, but again, the path is meandering because of the grade change. Is that right? It's not a direct path to Brookline Ave. Is
It
that?
is. It's trying to negotiate quite a lot of vertical change in a relatively small space, and so making the path a little bit longer gives us more run to get that rise. We want to stay under 5% so that we don't need like landings and handrails, so that it feels just like a garden path. 5% is equal to 1 foot in vertical change over 20 horizontal feet. So it feels very gradual. It's comfortable whether you're on foot or in a wheelchair or using some other mobility aid. Um, so like that path, for example, this one here, that's negotiating almost 4 feet of grade change from top to bottom. It meanders so that it can get that 4 feet without, needing like a switchback ramp that would feel very architectural. No offense to our architecture colleagues. But it would feel very sort of forced within a tight footprint, right? Trying to make it feel like a garden path, something that offers a little bit of respite. Um, that said, this is a relatively small site, so even the meander back and forth is a pretty short meander. If you go back to if I went back to that diagram of like the football field overlaid over the site, right now that the back and forth, the horizontal is like 8 steps. It's not far. So
Mhm, mhm.
trying to just get some more experiential range from a small site is sort of a large driver in the weaving paths as well.
Okay. I'm just wondering why the sidewalk at the top of the peninsula is so stark, so straight and singular. Is that absolutely necessary too?
It's a good question and one that we've internally been wrestling with this week, actually. Relative, I think we need some additional conversations with the city and with PIC to determine whether that right of way, that public right of way that falls, this blue line suggests a property line for the park. It's sort of hard to see, but there's a dark blue line in there. Then there's a pink dash line that's the property line for the hospital. So that straight line would be a an open city-owned public right of way. So it's sort of hemmed in between two properties. While we're renegotiating what that property line looks like, potentially it could meander a bit more if that made sense from an accessibility and inclusion, experiential, all sorts of factors I think we need to weigh. Um, but right now it's sort of a very clean delineation of, you know, public, private, park land. Um,
Okay, okay, I now I get that. Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Because I did want to again agree with you. If you can eliminate pavement as much as possible in order to increase the park dimensions, I think that would be great. But if it's a public right of way, I understand that. Okay. And actually that the brown area, what is that that you're speculating is happening there? Did I miss something? I probably did, but
Brown.
in the well, in the peninsula, the yellowish brown.
The yellowish tone. Yeah,
What is
okay. So those,
yeah, what's
yeah,
happening there?
it could be lots of different things. Those tones just suggest sort of more or less level, accessible plaza sort of space. So there might be movable furniture, there might be fixed furniture. If I went back to one of the diagrams of like, how tents might fit out into those places for a networking event or a farmer's market or something. It could be all sorts of different things. But we're imagining, I think you were the one, Allison, who mentioned it. People often come from, or maybe it was the past comment, I forget, but people are often coming from those restaurants and bringing their lunch into the park for, the 8 minutes they have before they have to get back to work. So we think of it as that kind of place, a place where people will come, maybe gather, maybe sit by themselves, have lunch, make a private phone call, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. I mean the bus stop actually used to be at the entrance of the park right there on that
Right.
block. So it's interesting to speculate where the future bus stop will be. And that given the number of people that wait at that stop, it easily can be, 20, 25 people standing around. So it could be interesting to combine the two ideas. But anyway, that's just my speculation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to the point about the bus stop, Allison and proponent team, correct me if I'm wrong, but the bus stop is going to be moving in front of the Rosenberg building, right? Along Brookline Ave, just sort of down on page from the extent of the drawing here.
That is the intent as we understand it.
Okay. And that's being worked through right now with BTD.
Right.
And I think some of the questions that were being asked as in the design approaches to these different options were, does there want to be a space that's more contiguous and connected to the sidewalk on Brookline Ave, as in option 3, or does that space want to be lifted and lofted above to help provide some visual and physical separation, as in option 1, to sort of still have it visually connected, but a little bit a place apart from the hustle and bustle of Longwood, and just didn't know which one made the most sense or what the pros and the cons of each option were. So I think that this was starting to try to get at what the different opportunities were, with it being flush with Longwood versus, Brookline, or raised.
That's one we'd love input on. I don't have an answer to that if
Yeah.
that was a question to me.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear if anyone in the community has a feeling about being, 4 feet above Brookline with a civic stair, kind of like the Spanish Steps in a little mini Spanish Steps in Rome, or what are some other kind of touch points, Chris, that have that kind of the stairs could be gathering spaces, but you do feel kind of like you're looking out over Brookline Ave versus being at street level and then navigating up those stairs to the Joslin Place.
Yeah, I could definitely see either option. I think there's something nice about being elevated above the street. I think from a like an auditory, experiential sense, you might, your view becomes out into the public realm more than like at the side of a car. It's a nuanced difference, but I think it does make a difference if you're sitting at a table, for example. I think one of the reasons this option in the Civic Stair where we're showing an elevated plinth more or less. Um, we're showing movable furniture like cafe tables up there. We're not showing them down here. We could. I think it would be less desirable as a place to sit any your lunch like at a sort of cafe table if it was right there at the elevation of the cycle track and the road. We can reorganize and add more planting to maybe pull it back and frame it and pull it away from the street experientially a little bit more. We're starting to do that. It felt it felt less like a place where you would want to pull up a movable chair than an elevated terrace that felt a little bit more separated. Both programs are,
Equally
you know,
valid.
yeah, valid, right. To sit
Yeah.
on a stone or a backed bench in the plaza here, it's just different. I will say that of from just if I were to pick, I think option two, while it suggests the most potentially diversity, I think the actual scale of these spaces are both quite small. And so I would go toward either option one or option three. Um, we have lots of, small landscape rooms within this scheme. I think when they get too small, they become cramped. So for me, it's sort of one or three, but
Yeah.
again,
There's
open
kind
to
of the compression and release
yeah, right.
that you're not quite getting with the option two. They're both about the same size. Yeah. Maybe if we can go back to the three plans and talk about I think the easiest question is probably lawn versus no lawn. And then I think then the question of the lawns is what's the right size of that lawn? One central lawn or smaller garden rooms. I don't know if anybody in the community has any thoughts or feelings about that.
Kathy, this is Allison again. I see Freddie probably had another meeting and had to drop off, but and I wish some of the other attendees would speak up. I honestly, my focus again is more on the interaction with the bus stop. I have to say, I feel like opening up a park so that people waiting sometimes a long time for a bus could actually be in the shade under sitting on a bench is really great versus having to be in on sitting under a bus shelter with all the traffic going by. So I'm not happy with the plan to move the stop to in front of the Rosenberg because the sidewalk there is so narrow. But anyway, I know that's not a Parks Department decision. I I don't really, obviously I think the lawns have been the argument against the lawn is pretty strong. So I'd say the garden rooms win out, but again, I'd like to hear from other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Is there anyone else who'd like to raise their hand and make a comment, thoughts, feelings, guts? Okay. Well, if anybody who's watching this has any thoughts or feelings, feel free to reach out to me, and I will share it with the design team. But I don't want to keep anybody here later than we need to tonight. So again, I really thank you for your thoughts and 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 the time that you've spent helping us figure out what the right site plan for the new Joslin Park is. So we can go to I think the final slide. Yep. So we do have a date for the next meeting, which is September 3rd. That link will be on the project website very shortly. The project website is www.boston.gov/Joslin-Park, and I'm dropping that in the chat as well. The video for tonight will also be posted there. We're going to try to also get the presentation slides up there as well, so that those who are unable to join us can catch up and weigh in as well. You or your neighbors are free to contact me anytime with your thoughts. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. It's kathy.baker-eclipse@boston.gov, or the Parks phone number is 617-635-4505. So like I said, the link for the next meeting will be posted on the website, and you can go and you can register to be a participant in that meeting as well. The We'll be synthesizing these comments, thoughts, and presenting a final site plan that we will move forward with developing the construction documents for. In general, if you have any questions about parks in general, you can go to the boston.gov/parks. There's lots of information there. If you have questions about starting or joining a friends group, the website is bit.ly/Boston-Parks-Partners. If you'd like to sign up for our Parks emails, the link is bit.ly slash get parks emails. I'm going to drop that in the chat as well, because links are much easier than me writing out websites. If there's questions, if there's issues with parks anywhere across the city, you can go to 311 or any other city issue. And you can also get in touch with us via our social media channels. It's at Boston Parks Department, DEPT, on most platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky. So again, I want to thank you all for joining this meeting. I hope it was helpful for you. We'll post the video as soon as possible, but it'll probably take a few days for it to get there. So be patient. But when that is linked, please share the link with your friends and neighbors, and reach out and contact me with any questions. So thank you again, and I hope to see you on August 4th or September 4th. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let's stop the recording if we could, Michael.
Kathy, just checking, was it September 3rd or September 4th?
September 4th, I think.
4th.
Did I get it wrong? It's the 4th. It's the first day of school. Because I know I asked my
Even better.
14-year-old which she would prefer, and she was like, the 3rd. I'm like, well, tough. It's the 4th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All
Take
right.
care.
Have a good night. Thanks.
You too.
Thanks, Michael. We'll talk tomorrow.